Yes, thank goodness. Hello. If I couldn't show IntelliJ IDEA on the screen, this whole talk would have been slightly pointless. But never mind. Also, my mouse isn't working, which is kind of fine, because the whole point of this talk is don't use the mouse. So I think my computer was trying to tell me something. Hello, yes, I'm Trisha. I'm 5 minutes late for this. What could possibly go wrong? I'm the developer advocate for IntelliJ IDEA with JetBrains. And what I wanted to do with this presentation, some of you might have noticed if you were looking at the agenda a couple of weeks back that this was called something slightly different. It was what's new in IntelliJ IDEA. But what I actually got a lot of feedback from with real users of IntelliJ IDEA is not so much what are the new features I'm not aware of, but like I usually use IntelliJ as a bit of a glorified text editor. What should I really be doing? So what I wanted to do with this session is really demo how we as developers actually write code inside IntelliJ IDEA. And there'll be features here that you've used in the past and features here that might be new. But the whole idea is to sort of demonstrate the flow of how to use IntelliJ IDEA. If you don't learn anything from this presentation, then that's a good thing. That means that you are a very effective developer and everything is fine. But hopefully you'll pick up some tips and tricks as we go along. And I'm in a slightly panicky mode because everything didn't work to begin with. So yes, what could possibly go wrong? And also, I've got the resolution at such a weird thing, so I can see it, so you can see it there, that I can't see it here. I'm going to be coding like this. Right, so I'm going to do something that we don't often do. I'm actually going to start from a brand new project from scratch, even though my mouse doesn't work, and basically start building everything up from scratch. The idea being to sort of show how IntelliJ IDEA will help you to build your projects. We will start with a Maven. Can we see this okay? It's a bit small, isn't it? At the back, can you see it? Yeah? There's like 3 people at the back who can see it, so that's fine with me. We're going to create a brand new Maven project. We're going to use a group ID of, I don't know, com.mechanitis.demo, artifact ID, Devoxx demo. We just basically say yes to everything. We just take the defaults from IntelliJ IDEA because I'm lazy like that. And then we end up with a nice empty project. All the keyboard shortcuts I use should be flashing up on the bottom of the screen as I use them. I might remember to stop and tell you what those shortcuts are, but the whole point is to try and demo me using them, and hopefully you'll be able to see what they are. If at any point someone desperately wants me to stop and drill into something, please raise your hands and shout. But I do know that's after lunch, and this is a very nice dark theatre, and some of you might just be having a gentle snooze in the background. And that's okay too, because it looks like I've got a full room, and I'm fine with that. So we've got our example project up. Let's start navigating through. So in our project browser, which we can't hardly see because it's very, very tiny, we can see, obviously, our standard structure from it being a Maven project. First thing we want to do is create a package. So I'm going to use create, which in Windows is Alt and Insert, and in Mac is Command and N. I'm going to create a new package. In IntelliJ IDEA, whatever you want to do, wherever you are, you can start typing and the search functionality will work. So here, when I said new, even though there's not a search box, I can start typing package and it will narrow down that I want a new package. So I create a new package, com.mechanitis.demo, and it will create me the package there. And then what I can do is I can... Right, the question is, do I want to write the test first or the code first? Let's say we write our code first. So we create a new Java class. I'm going to be fairly straightforward. I'm just going to use, create a square. So the code is not going to be super exciting because I want to focus on the flow rather than the thing we're trying to create. And then from here, I should be able to say I want to generate a new test. So without having done anything else, I should be able to generate a new test, which it will put in the right package. It's the same package. It will create a default test name, and then up here I should be able to select. I'm going to use a JUnit 5 test, and it'll tell you JUnit 5 isn't found. Do you want to fix this? And I say yes, please fix this problem for me. And then I just generate my test. So now I have my test. It should be, if we go over here, we should see that the test is correctly placed into the test directory. And we should also see that Oh, I accidentally did it twice. When it said fix the dependency for me, it put it into Maven. So it did the right thing. It found JUnit 5 and it put it into my Maven POM file. It didn't do something weird like put it into the IntelliJ dependencies. It puts it into the POM file because that's kind of where you expect to see your dependencies managed. And then we can start writing our test. So I'm just going to use code generation to generate stuff, because if you're typing stuff in IntelliJ IDEA, you're doing it wrong. IntelliJ IDEA will write everything for you. Don't worry about it. So I'm going to generate myself a test method. It does the right thing. It imports the JUnit 5 annotations and creates a JUnit 5 style test. I'm going to say should have 4 corners. I'm going to do things in a test-driven way because this is how we should work as developers. Who does test-driven development? Some of you. I'm so proud of you. Who writes tests for their code? About 90% of you. That's pretty good. The rest, I'm just going to assume the rest of you aren't developers, and that's fine. Because that's terrifying. Right, so we're going to say we want to have a new square. And again, this is all about the flow. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to type every single letter of the line. So I say I want a new square, and then I use the refactoring tools to create me a square variable. Okay, so I don't have to type square equals new square. I just say new square, and then I use, what did I do? Let's try it again. I don't even know. My fingers just do what they're supposed to do. I use Control, Alt, and V. It will extract the variable and give it a sensible name. So I don't have to type any of that stuff. And then I say, let's say, square get number of corners. And of course, IntelliJ says that doesn't exist. There's no such thing as that. So I say, OK, fine. Go off and create me one of those. What does it look like? It's got an int. By default, this says it's going to return 0. I don't want it to do that because in some cases that might make the test pass without me thinking about it. So I can change what code it generates in these places. So what I'm going to do is if I go to settings, and then I'm going to, again, I'm going to use search. So I'm going to look for, what was it, implementations. And then in file and code templates, under implemented method body, I'm going to say, I don't want to have a default return. I would rather have throw new unsupported operation exception, not implemented. So IntelliJ will try and do all the right things, of course, but if it doesn't do the things that we want it to do, we can customize it to do what we want to do. So hopefully, once I have done that, what I should do is, let's say we get rid of this, go back to my test, use Control-Shift-T to navigate between the test and the thing you're testing. Now, when I use Alt and Enter to do magic fix, I create the method, and it should not do what I told it to do. Fantastic. Oh, I'll use that later on. I was doing the wrong one. Never mind. Fine, that's fine. The test will fail, and that's the important thing. So we'll go back to our test. And again, put this out into number of corners, and then we do assertion, start assert equals. Remember, when you're doing, when you start typing stuff in IntelliJ IDEA, you don't have to start typing the start of the method name. You can write the method name from the middle. So here I want something which is assert equals, so I just typed .eq, and then it will find me assert equals, even though I didn't type the assert bit. So then I want, I expect number of corners to be 4. And then we run this. And of course, if you're using one of the more recent versions of IntelliJ IDEA, you will already have seen probably the parameter name hints, which I find super useful. So if you're using primitive values or nulls or booleans, it will label that with the name of the parameter, so you've got an idea of what this mythical, magical number means. It's particularly useful for tests when you're not sure which one is the expected and which one is the actual, and so having that labeled there in the IDE is super useful. So our test fails, which it should do, because we haven't implemented it yet. And here, where my mouse doesn't work, it's very irritating. Why is my mouse not working? Go away. What could possibly go wrong? Hurrah! Microsoft are here, so I could probably go and talk to them and say, your Surface doesn't work sometimes. Right, so that fails. So I love my Surface Microsoft. I've had it for 3 years. It's fantastic. If I could have a new one, that would be amazing. Just saying, man, it's a good advert for you. So it doesn't work. So what we want to do is we want to drill into the implementation so we can implement it. There are 2 ways of doing this in IntelliJ IDEA. Obviously, we can navigate between the test subject and the test itself, like I was doing, or I can drill straight in using Control-Alt-B, and then it will take me to the implementation of the method that's not working. So fine. So then we just do simplest thing that works, rerun our test, and it should pass. Hooray, everything works. Okay, next step. We have the simplest thing that could possibly work. We generated a bunch of our code using IntelliJ IDEA. Obviously, we're going to use source control, aren't we? We use source control. And then we can import it into Git so that we don't start losing things. We're going to do things in incremental small commits because that's the right thing to do. Now, I'm glad my mouse came back. Here, I'm going to use the mouse. In VCS, we can say import into version control, and we can say create Git repository. So then I've just got my top-level project directory selected, and then it will just magically import it into Git. And then when I open up my VCS window, which is Alt and 9, I can see I've got a bunch of unversioned files there, which is all the stuff that I just created. One of the things we want to do is we want to create probably a git ignore file. So let's do that. Let's create a file, which is git ignore. Let's spell it right. And then we can say, there's a few things I don't want to put in here. I don't want to put my workspace in here. So there's a workspace. If you're using the gitignore plugin, it will also give you code completion inside your gitignore file, which is quite nice. It will also offer to add any unversioned files automatically into gitignore, which is not necessarily what you want to do because you probably want to version your unversioned files. Probably, just saying. So then when you make changes to your gitignore file, IntelliJ IDEA will also take that into account and say, OK, fine, I'm just not going to pay attention to those files either. So it's kept completely in sync. Now I'm going to commit everything using Command and K. And I can see not only the files I have ready for commit, but also my unversioned files. And I'm just going to select all of those. And then put a commit message, obviously, initial commit. Everything works. Now, what a lot of people don't really pay attention to is the stuff on the right-hand side here, all the other bits and pieces you can do. Now, these are like super useful, especially if you're working inside a team, because this allows you to automate a bunch of stuff before it even goes into Git. For example, reformatting code is quite nice. If you've got standard code format, then you probably want to make sure everything's formatted in a standard way before you commit it, so that you're not all trampling all over each other's formatting. Rearrange code as well, I'll talk about that in a minute. I want to do optimize imports because whenever I have check style on my project, I always fail it because I forgot to optimize my imports. Code analysis will check for any of your yellow warnings and squigglies, and to do will do the same thing for your to do. I tend to turn those off because they're quite time consuming when you're doing the commit. But that's going to depend a little bit on your team. And cleanup will also automatically clean up some of those warnings, which I think is potentially a little bit risky, so you might not want to do that. But it's worth looking at those things to see what you can automate as you check stuff in, so you're always on the same page as a team. Sure, just add everything to Git. Now, that was the kind of simple run-through of kind of how to work in IntelliJ IDEA. One of the things you will probably notice is that I don't use a lot of the stuff that's on the screen, and I generally don't use the mouse very much. So I'm going to turn off a lot of the noise. I'm going to turn off my tabs. Oh, so your magic secret incantation, if you can't remember how to do something in IntelliJ IDEA, is Shift, Control, and A. And then you can search for any action. So if you've forgotten the keyboard shortcut for something, or if it doesn't have a keyboard shortcut, that is where you're going to type it in. So here, I want to turn off the tabs, so I'm going to type tabs. This also searches for things like settings and all sorts of stuff. So I'm going to say I want my tabs, I don't want any tabs, so we just turn that off. I say I don't want my navigation bar. So I'm going to turn my navigation bar off, and I don't want my breadcrumbs. So I'm going to turn that off as well. And then I use Shift, Control, and F12 to actually concentrate on the stuff I'm really working on. Now, you probably know there is also presentation mode, which makes it nice and big and is easier to see. I tend not to use these in demos because I like to work with the IDE the way that you people are going to be working with the IDE. But if you're demoing to testers, to users, to other developers, this is quite a good way of putting it into a size where someone else can actually see your screen. And there's also distraction-free mode, which is basically the same thing I just did, except for apparently there's one distraction there. It's basically the same thing I just did. It gets rid of everything and just lets you focus on the code. So exit distraction-free mode. I think I'm in distraction-free mode and presentation mode at the same time. Yes, I am. Fantastic. And then we just get back to just the code. So with IntelliJ IDEA, you really don't need all the other faff around the screen. You don't need all the windows. You should be using the keyboard shortcuts to bring up the stuff when you want it and to navigate through the code. So the main ones I tend to use is I use Alt and 1 to get to the project navigator, and then we can use our up and down, obviously. And we can also search inside here. So if we want to look for square, we can just start typing square, and we can find where square is. One of the other shortcuts I use a lot is Alt and 9 to get to the VCS view, including the log. Well, we've only got one commit, so we won't look at that right now. And the other thing is some of the windows don't have shortcuts. So for example, to open up the Maven build window, you can use Control and E, which gives you not just your recent files, but it also gives you all of the windows you might want to look at. So here I'm going to look for the Maven one, and then I can open the Maven window like that. Okay, so you shouldn't be using the mouse. You shouldn't be clicking on windows. You shouldn't have windows open up all the time. You should just be, as much as possible, concentrating on the code and opening up stuff when you want it. Okay, so the other thing I tend to use, as I say, is I use Control-E to navigate to all the different files that I'm using, but I don't have many to show you, so you'll just start to see this as I continue working on the code here. What else is there? All right, let's have a look at some of the Maven support, just a little bit of it. To which I have to apologize if any of the Gradle guys are in the audience, because I had a great conversation with the Gradle guys this morning saying how much I love Gradle, and then I'm using Maven in this demo. I'm sorry. And so that should have errored, hopefully. Give me an error. OK, the compilation failed because I'm using, I want to be using Java 11. So I can go into my Maven file, and then in my Maven, in my POM file, I'm also going to get a certain amount of code completion like I would usually get for all other sorts of files. So I can say properties, and I want Java version, java.version. I'm going to use 11. And then I get completion on my XML. So if you do HTML development or XML development, you already know that you get a lot of help inside IntelliJ for XML and HTML as well. And then hopefully, so down here in the bottom right-hand corner, it says Maven projects need to be imported, import changes, or enable auto-import. This was new-ish in one of the more recent releases. It means that whenever you touch a Maven file or a Gradle file, you can either have it so that you manually apply those changes, or just have it automatically apply any changes as soon as you touch that file. So, and that depends on what you want. If you're touching the file a lot, then you probably don't want the enable auto import, because it's always going to be importing whenever you make a tiny change. Now, hopefully, when I go back to my Maven build, oops, that's not what I wanted. Go there. Now I'm doing two things at once. What could possibly go wrong? It should pick up the right version. I knew you were going to do that to me. All right, let's try again. Did I use the right tab for Java version? No, I want to go to Maven. I was using Java version, and it was working. Probably I've actually got a compilation error. Let's see. Build failure, 2 errors. Oh, that's so weird. Oh, I don't really know. I was using exactly the same thing in my other project, and it was fine. I'm just going to set that to 11, which shouldn't make any difference, because that's for IntelliJ. Oh, well, it doesn't really matter, I suppose. I'm not really using Maven here anyway. Oh, well. It's not a live demo if it doesn't go wrong. But this worked. I had it working. I've got exactly the same code. Right, fine. I'm going to open up my other one and just prove that it works. Java version 11. What did I type wrong? Copy, paste. Yeah, the white space and indentation, it makes a big difference. It's fantastic. Right, never mind. I'm sure everything's fine. I don't need it right now anyway. And I'm just, maybe this is the maybe this is the Gradle guys going, oh, make it fail. Fine. All right, I won't do that. Let's see. What were we doing? Navigation. Right. So we're looking at navigation. 25 minutes left. What's the most interesting stuff to be working on? I've got loads of things to demo, so obviously I'm not going to squeeze it all into 45 minutes, so I'm just going to try and do the interesting stuff. Let's look at our square. So one of the things that I use quite a lot, you saw me using navigate to implementation, which lets me kind of drill through into the implementations. Now, here, it doesn't really matter whether I use navigate to implementation, which is Control, Alt, and B, or whether I use Control and B to use go to. I'll show you what the difference is. So let's use a slightly more complicated refactoring. I love the refactoring tools in IntelliJ. One of the main goals of IntelliJ IDEA is that your code is always green. I know that sometimes when you're working with other editors, and sometimes, well, when we started learning to program with just like text editors, often what we do is we kind of hack away at some code, and then we fix all the errors. And that's kind of how we work. And then we rename something, we find out what broke, and fix the errors. And that's not how you work in IntelliJ IDEA. The idea is that every action should still lead to green code. It should always be compiling, always able to run the tests. So the refactoring tools are one of the main ways to do this. Here, I want to extract an interface. I'm going to extract an interface called shape, not surprisingly. I'm going to pull up the method getNumberOfCorners into this interface. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to also, IntelliJ offers the option to turn this from using square to using shape instead. So if I tick this, it says everywhere that you were using the implementation, you can start using the interface instead. So I do that. Let's have a look at our test, see what it looks like. Square test. Yeah. Never mind, it didn't do that, but never mind. It's fine, what could go wrong? Anyway, so if we go into our implementation here, we go to, huh? Oh yeah, now I need to use the mouse, which is absolutely ridiculous. Fine, use the mouse. Do it, do the refactor, do what I told you to do, for goodness sake. Just read my mind and do everything. So let's have a look at the test. So now it's shape. What was I doing? Where was I? Who am I? What are you all doing here? Okay, so one of the great things here is I extracted an interface called shape, which pulled up the method with the signature that we had. That's fine. Let's go back to our test. It hasn't really made a lot of difference, but what we could do, so here if we were drilling into the implementations, obviously we get the only implementation, which is square. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to go into my shape. I'm going to do Alt and Enter, my magic incantation. I'm going to implement the interface, and I'm going to create a circle. And then it will offer to create the methods from the interface as well. And here's where we get our throw new unsupported operation exception, which was the thing I changed earlier to say this is how I want you to generate my methods so that my tests always fail. Now I have a circle which implements shape. Now I want a test for this class, obviously, because tests are good. So I do navigate to test, which is control and shape, control and T. And because there is no test for this, it offers to create a new test. So I will just create a new test. And then I can generate my test method, and I can say, ooh, that's a terrible test name, should have no corners. And then I could say new circle. I could say circle, get number of corners. This is my number of corners, and I could say, if I do this, will it work? Assert equals yes. I want it to have 0 corners. So it's fairly easy to generate our new classes, to generate our tests for those classes, not fully generate tests, because you don't want to generate tests, you're supposed to think about the test, but generate a lot of the boilerplate that just sort of gets in the way. And we're going to run this test. It should fail, of course, for the right reason, unsupported operation exception. Now, let's change this to be a shape. And if I did what I did before, and I did navigate to implementation, now it gives me 2 options, the implementation of circle or square. So I can easily drill into whichever implementations I've got. And here, obviously, I just want circle. And I can do the simplest thing that works, and return 0. Rerun the test, and everything works. OK, so navigating through the code, you don't need the mouse. You should be able to navigate through things like go to implementation. You should be able to generate stuff automatically on the fly. You can also do things like, if I go in here, I can say find usages, which is Alt and F7, so I can see where things are used. So I can easily sort of see, if I'm changing something, what's the impact? What are the things which will be impacted by perhaps adding a new method to this interface, that sort of thing. There's a lot more refactoring stuff we could be doing, of course. Let's say we want to, let's go to shape again, square, 19 minutes. I'm going to show like 20 years of development on IntelliJ IDEA in 20 minutes. No. So refactoring, I mean, this is a very very simple class, so refactoring is sort of pointless. But my favorite refactorings are extract variables, so this is number of corners. And you can also do things like extract field. One of the things I like about extract field is it asks you, where do you want to initialize this field? Do you want to initialize it in the method where it's being used? Do you want to initialize it in the constructor or in the field declaration? And if, say, we put it in the constructor, it'll obviously set it in the constructor. And if we change our mind and say, look, I don't really want it in the constructor, I can Alt-Enter on that and say, move assignment to field declaration. So once again, when we're changing our code, we should be asking IntelliJ to change stuff and move stuff around for us so things don't break, so things are always green. I can even do things like here, once I've got this empty constructor, I don't need it, I can do Alt and delete, and it will just safe delete that, and nothing goes wrong. So everything should always be green. Our tests aren't necessarily passing, but we shouldn't really have any red squigglies unless we are purposefully creating a call to a new method, which is a method we want to create, for example. What else can we look at? So yes, let's also look at extracting method. Let's look at our test again. Let's create another test. Should have 4 edges. Not shape, new square. Get number of edges. IntelliJ offers to do a bunch of things here. I want to create a read-only property, number of edges, and that will automatically create the right method, but also a field to associate with that method. If I'd said create a property, let's do that. So there we go. You can see we've got number of edges, which we haven't initialized, and get number of edges. Now, let's say we didn't do that. Fine. Be like that. Let's say undo that refactoring. And if we said create property, number of edges in square, then it will create me the getter and the setter for that field. It'll just generate that stuff for me. So again, I don't have to do any typing, I just have to do generation. Yes, of course, it's because Java is slightly boilerplate heavy, but if you're going to be working with Java, these are the tricks you need to do so that you don't have to keep typing all this stuff all the time. Let's not have a setter because setters are evil. We all know this. I get one round of applause for that. Thank you, it's very kind. And make this final because mutability is evil. Okay, so now we've got number of edges, and the reason I'm doing this is so I can have some duplication, so I can start refactoring stuff for you. So we can do assert equals, assertions, assert equals, number of edges. We want that to be a magic number. Now, hopefully that works, and then we can do some refactoring. Because I'm uncomfortable doing refactoring if I don't have tests. You will also see I have an underlying agenda to this. We should do test-driven development. We should do tests. Tests are a good thing. Right, so let's do some refactoring. Let's extract a method. What's that? I didn't hear anything, so that's fine. Let's extract a method. So I'm going to do something which is simple and slightly stupid to begin with, but you're going to get the idea of what we're doing. So we extract a method. We're going to call it, I don't know, assert value. IntelliJ IDEA goes, OK, looks like there's another place we can replace that, so that's fine. We reduce our duplication, so I'm going to replace that. So now we have one method which is called in two different places. I can do things like I can decide, well, I don't really want the number 4 hard-coded in there because I might want to pass in different values. So I'm going to extract parameter with Control, Alt, and P. And then we can call this expected value. So now I have a method which has number of edges and expected value. IntelliJ put the right number back into the original call site. I don't like it that way around because it's not in the right order. So I'm going to use Control F6 to move the parameters around. Again, this is all about keeping the code compiling at all times. You don't make a change in one local place and go around and fix everything. You do the refactoring tools to make the changes seamlessly. Okay, so that's fine. That's sort of pointless because it's basically the same method. I've just put it into the same place. So I've decided I don't want to do this anymore. Let's inline it. So we can also do the opposite of extracting variables and methods. We can inline. So Control, Alt, and N. I can inline the method. I'm going to inline all the methods and remove the method. So it basically pulls the contents back to where that method was being called. Again, no compiler warnings, no errors. It just works. So let's do something a little bit more interesting. I'm going to extract this into a method. Control, Alt, M. I don't know, assert. It has detected, IntelliJ IDEA detects that if I want to reduce the duplication in my code, I can actually create a slightly different method to the one that I asked for, and that will allow me to reduce duplication. I don't want to do that because I want to make some more changes to this method. So I will keep the original signature. Now what I want to do is, here's where we need to use Java 11. So let's make sure we've got Java 11, and in my module as well. This needs to be on 11. Technically, it needs to be on 8, but we live in a modern world. We should be using Java 11 from now on. And what I want to do is I'm going to extract a functional parameter because lambdas are cool and we all want to use lambdas. This is a bit late for this, really, isn't it? Everyone's using Java 8 now, right? Who's using Java 8? Most of you. Who's using Java 9? Oh, well done. Who's using Java 10? Who's using Java 11? Brilliant. That's quite good. Who's using something lower than any of those? You poor, poor people. So sorry for you. Are you Android developers? I'm not being funny, it quite often is. All right, anyway, lambdas. Lambdas are great. We want to put lambdas everywhere. So I use extract functional parameter, which is Control, Alt, Shift, and P, because I have that many fingers. And then IntelliJ IDEA suggests a functional interface which will represent the lambda parameter, which is something that I found very difficult to get my head around when I first started doing lambdas, because I'm like, why is the lambda parameter, why is it not like an actual lambda? But I will talk about that in my talk tomorrow, so come along to that. So it will say, IntelliJ goes, OK, don't worry your pretty little head about it, I will take care of it. And you go, OK, just do it. And then, oh, let's not do it like that. Let's do it a different way. Int supplier converts to a functional expression, which means use a lambda. So you refactor it, and in actual fact, it doesn't use a lambda. It goes, method reference will do this. So now what I'm doing is I am passing in the assertion that I want it to run. So let's inline that. And then, because I don't want to hard code 4, I'll extract that back into a parameter, expected value. Note that IntelliJ tries to suggest sensible names for these things. Right, and then I'm going to reorder this as well, so that it's sensible. So yes, so you can start doing things like extracting functional parameters and start moving code around. And theoretically, I can also do the same thing up here. I can say assert equals, no, assert value. So this is where I actually start typing code. Smart completion. I haven't mentioned smart completion because I haven't used completion very much. Shift, Control, and Space will suggest to you the most suitable value that IntelliJ thinks you want to pass in there. In this case, it's picked out 2 values which are integer values. Now I want to hard code that, so actually I don't want that. But if I do that with a lambda expression, it starts to say, if I do that with a functional parameter, it says this is a lambda expression. And you're like, oh right, I wondered what an int supplier was. And then you pass that in, and you say, I want shape, what's this, corners, should have 4 corners. And then it will fail. Oh, yes. Oh, I'm being dumb. Shape dot. Get number of corners. And then it will say, you don't want that as a lambda expression. This should be a method reference. Oh, there you go. And then you can use Control and Y, which is my favorite shortcut, because it's delete code. Deleting code is a good thing. All right. So with those refactoring things, you should be seeing that you're not deleting stuff. You're not typing all over things. You're using the refactoring tools to move stuff around without breaking anything. Obviously, here we've done it on a small scale. It's much more powerful when you're creating methods and classes which impact more classes. Obviously, when you first start using these tools, I was like, how do I know that it's worked? Because everything is still passing. How could it possibly have done the right thing? And if you've got a test suite which proves that everything is still working, then the refactoring has worked the way you expected it to. If you're doing refactoring, of course, do it in small steps. Do small commits, which I have not been doing. Do small commits so that you know which things you did and you can roll them back when things went wrong. So refactoring everything. And I will purposefully leave that mistake in there. So we will commit that, and then I can show you another feature. One of the things I really like is you go, oh no, I did a spelling mistake. The world is over. This is a terrible, terrible thing. And you say F2, and you reword it. And you say, okay, never mind. Fixed. No problems. Okay? So you can reword commits. You can also do things like, let's have a look. What's in this commit? Maybe you said, maybe I don't want to check in one of the changes for circle. So let's say circle. Maybe I want to extract this out into a field. Fine. Oh, horrible name. And maybe I said, I want to commit this as part of my last commit. So I do Command K, and I say amend commit. And that will go in the last commit. Okay, so I can amend the latest commit. If I've forgotten a file, or if I've got one change that I want to put in, or one change that I don't want to put in. It gets a little bit dangerous because you're starting to rewrite history. It's very useful for some of these tiny things. And one of the other things you can do is, if we look at, let's see, I don't know, what can we do? Make some changes. Let's just create a couple of test files. Let's see if this works the way I want it to. I'm going to use Control, Shift, and Up to move blocks of code around, because you don't need to copy and paste. And then if I commit this, you can also see this is a fairly new-ish feature. Let's move this up so you can see. I can do partial commits. So I can commit just the bottom one if I want to, not the second one. Again, that's a little bit risky because obviously if you've run all of your tests and they all pass and you do a partial commit, you're not necessarily committing the same code that passed all the tests. But it can be useful particularly for comments or little changes that you don't want to go in the commit. So that's quite useful. All right, I've got 6.30 minutes left. That's very precise. I've got loads and loads of other things I can demo. Oh, right, I will demo one thing which I really like because it's great. But then I really want to hopefully have some time for questions. And if there aren't any questions, I can demo some other stuff. But let's talk a little bit about live templates. If you've seen my code demos before, you've probably seen me magically generate code from thin air because I'm using live templates. And live templates are the best thing ever. So my favorite, actually, although you should probably never use this in production code, is SOUT for system out println. So we can system out println something. That's fine. So I don't have to type all that nonsense. There's variations on this. So I quite often use SOUT v, and that will print out a variable that you have in scope. Or SOUT p, which will print out nothing. Usually prints out the, parameters, that's right. So I actually want that one, SOUT m, which prints out the method that you're in. So it's useful for debugging. It means you don't have to type in any of that stuff. My other favorite thing is, I don't really have one here, so let me go to a different project. Let's talk about ITER. No, ITER, yes. So you can use there's a bunch of live templates for iterating, and it will automatically pick something that you could iterate over and generate you a for loop for that, for example. There's a bunch. You can use ITR for arrays, and you can see there's a whole load of them there. So if you want to iterate over anything, type it, and then see if there's some live template that will generate the code for you. And what's my other favorite thing? So let's see if we've got... I haven't really gone into a lot of stuff around streams, but I found IntelliJ IDEA super useful for me when I was trying to get my head around streams, because I hadn't really worked in a streamy type way. I haven't worked with other programming languages before with any that supported that before I used Java 8. And I found IntelliJ IDEA is really useful. So you can do things like, even if it's an array, which doesn't have a stream method, you can say stream, and it will automatically generate you something which you can do stream type operations on, which is quite nice as well. So it can kind of turn anything into a stream. And if you have something like, let's see, if you have a stream operation like this, let's get rid of this. Then I do Alt-Enter. I can replace a stream API chain with a loop. If I find it a bit easier to read the loop code, then I can change it into a loop, and then I can also change it back. So if I'm here, I can say, right, turn me into a collect. And it will just automatically do that. I've got 3.3 minutes left. Any questions? Preferably something that takes less time than 3 minutes to ask the question. Yes?
The pop-up, the green pop-up with the key completion.
Yes.
Is it built in?
It's a plugin. So the pop-up at the bottom is a plugin called Presentation Assistant, or Presentation Assist. You just search for plugins. And if you do pair programming, I encourage everyone to turn it on so that you can see what people are using. Yes?
Spring configuration check. I get that all the time. What is it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that wasn't supposed to be there. IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate will note that you're using some Spring type stuff. You haven't configured the Spring configuration properly, and yet somehow in this application I have configured it properly. I just end up with like 3 different configurations. It's supposed to help you automatically configure all your Spring stuff. It doesn't always work the way I expect it to. What do you do with it? So I usually go, OK, show help, and oh my goodness. OK, no, I don't usually do that. I usually click on it with a mouse that's not working, and often it brings up the Spring configuration, and you add a Spring configuration file to it. So you add your context files, and it will figure stuff out for you. I end up sometimes with 2 or 3. When I fix this on here, I will blog about it, so I can tell you all about it. Yes?
How easy is it to change the keyboard shortcuts? So if I'm used to a certain set, and I use other things like IntelliJ sometimes, it's good to change it.
Yes. So how do you change the keyboard shortcuts? That is a great question. I switch between the Surface and my Mac a lot, and the keyboard shortcuts are different because it's Control versus Command. So you go to Settings, you go to Key Map. There are a bunch of built-in ones. Oh, this mouse is driving me crazy. There's a bunch of built-in ones, like the default for macOS and Windows, and you can even use the Eclipse key bindings if that's your sort of thing. I tend to override a few individual ones. The ones in blue are the ones I've overridden to be more useful for me. I found that sometimes the way that you run tests on Windows versus Mac is slightly different, so I've applied my own key bindings for run recently failed or something like that, and this is where you do that. 1 minute left for more questions. Something from, yes?
I've seen you executing the run on the tests, but is there a way to switch the profiles that you run?
So is there a way to switch profiles that you're running on the tests?
Well, you can have different configurations that you run. I know.
Yes. So one of the ways you can do that, I probably don't have that in here, is Control F2. Yes, there is. Hold on. Let me use my magic run configurations. Alt-Shift F10. Yeah, that's right. So you do Alt-Shift F10 on Windows. I think it's Command F2 on the Mac. It's something different. And it will give you all the configurations, and then you can basically select the one that you want to run. So you don't just have to run. What I was using was the keyboard shortcut for the last thing that I ran. All right, my time is up. So thank you very much.